It is that time again. It is a solo Q&A and it's episode 259 of the podcast. Lots of questions to get through, lots of different topics, including, I guess, because of the recent general election, some political stuff, some society stuff, some mindset, some routine stuff. There's lots and lots. So let's kick off with question number one, and that is, in what ways has the podcast developed your character? I would say it's been vastly positive, the different character developments that I've had during the time of starting the podcast in April 2020, and the different traits that I've worked on within my character. I think the first of those that stands out is the fact that I was already a patient person, but it certainly continued to teach me over and over and over again the power of delayed gratification, because some of the highs and the moments have been incredible. But in order to get those highs and to get those moments where you feel really fulfilled or really excited, it takes hours of work to generate that. So whether that's booking a particular guest, whether that's getting really deep feedback from a listener about how it's impacted their life, or just zooming out and seeing the steady growth over time, these are all highs that you are really made to earn. And I think any pursuit, definitely not just restricted to the podcasting world, any area that's not known for overnight success or results, which is most things that are worth having, will develop delayed gratification and patience in your personality and in your character. So you don't just need to start a podcast to develop this part of you. I think there's lots of other things that you can do to improve that area of life, and I think it's a really valuable trait to have. Other character traits that I think have developed: greater curiosity. And that's just a general level of interest, both in individuals and their feats, but also understanding their why and their driver. And having a curiosity and it being a genuine interest in where they've come from, what they've done, what they've gone on to do, why they've done that. That is certainly something that I think has been a positive thing for me. And it's probably been positive for the people that spend time around me as well, because when somebody is interested in you, it feels great. Everyone's favorite topic is themselves. So, or at least it's their most well-known topic anyway, typically. I think I was already pretty well suited to podcasting just in general. Some of the skills that I'd done beforehand in my working career, I definitely developed what I've gone on to do. And I think because I was already somebody that was pretty routined and quite liked habits over just huge novelty, I definitely think the podcast has helped me to double down in that area as well. Because while I do get the novelty of a different guest every week, the routines and the processes are very, very similar. But the novelty that I'm gaining is through the different types of people and the different types of conversations. But yeah, certainly I think the biggest things have been my patience with the process and my intrigue and interest in people. This is an incredible question for question two. Shout out to Dave over on Patreon who asked me this one. Shane Parrish talks in his book, Clear Thinking, about having your own board of directors. These can be people you genuinely know or people you look up to, past or present. They act as a guide, a sounding board when you make big life decisions and general life choices. If you could only have 4 on your board of directors, who are they and why? I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to group people together and I'm going to count them as 1 to make this work, I think. And the first group of people I'm going to group together is my mum and dad, my parents, because I think anyone that is a respectful son or daughter has tremendous respect for what their parents think and feel about their life choices and how they live. That's not to say that you should let your parents dictate how you live in their entirety. However, you should absolutely try and live in an image that makes them feel proud. And there's many different ways to do that. And of course, there's going to be times where you make a decision that they're worried about. I mentioned before, when I moved from insurance into the furniture world, my dad was very unsure because being a big broker like Marsh, that made the family feel really proud. But then to move to somewhere smaller, less heard of, but ultimately it was the right move for me. And he's seen the fiscal success that I've had and the fulfillment that I've had from moving into somewhere I can make a lot more sales. So he's been proud of me. So that'd be the first group. I definitely use mum and dad for big life decisions, big choices, and I listen to their perspectives. Parents will always be slightly more conservative with a small c because they want the best from you. So they might be less inclined to support radical choices, but it's still worth considering their perspective, even if you are going to go ahead with a really, really big choice. And next up is going to be another family member, and that's my brother Ian. We live together, we own our property together, and I sometimes joke about being the majority shareholder of the flat, but I really do take his counsel seriously. And if I'm a shareholder and he's a shareholder, and that does link into the whole board of directors theme, He typically errs more on the side of pessimism on a number of areas. However, he also is considerably more open to experimentation than I am. And he typically tries more things before me. And I often follow suit once he's maybe proven that a new method or a new activity is worthwhile. So Ian is quite often the guinea pig for a lot of things. So when we bounce things off each other, I quite often benefit from the fact that he's lent into those things. And sometimes he brings me down to earth, albeit I think I'm quite a realist as well. He can be quite pessimistic and quite reserved, and he can cut through a lot of the bullshit, which is very helpful to have in your corner. I'm also going to group two people together for this third board member, and that is Chris Burns and David Hatt. You will have heard them many times on the roundtable that we do, and I sometimes joke that they are, or we are when we come together, three sort of wise men. And both of them are people that I've known for a very long time from when I first started creating content online. I got to know David really early on, 2017. And then Chris probably a year or so after that through David. And both of them are people that I am in a group chat with, and I really value what they think about business and content and strategy. And I think they are quite good people to run things past and sound things off in terms of the reality, because both are very successful in their own field, and they have really good values in how they make their decisions and how they live as well. So I certainly think that's a helpful sounding board to have on my board of directors. Last but not least, I'm going to think about, and I could have so many different people in this role, but you mentioned past. Many of you know that I speak highly of my mum's dad, my grandpa Willie, who was Willie Thornton, who played for Rangers, served in the military during World War II, won a military medal, and was somebody that was held in great esteem by all those that knew him and accomplished great things. Without ranking what people in my family have accomplished, he's definitely somebody that accomplished the most spectacular of feats within my family in terms of making it to the top of professional football and the world that goes with that. And then, of course, fighting and serving for his country. That's certainly something that inspires me. So I definitely think about how capable and strong a man he was. And that's certainly something that allows me to reflect on the decisions that I make as well. Are they in line with the type of offspring that a man of that caliber would have? And can I work towards feats which are worthy of the type of individual that was part of that family as well? So that, I think that's a helpful for board of directors. But I could definitely have many more people on there. And I also think that when you think about the term sounding board, it's really important that when you're making your decisions, you also spend time alone thinking about them, and you maybe use pen and paper to what I would call other or distance, self-distance, and look down upon yourself as the person making that decision. The whole Jordan Petersonism, where would you give that advice to a friend if you were making that decision? And I think that can be really, really helpful too. Number 3, what are the low-cost niceties that make you happy? There's the whole Naval quote, isn't there? If you can't be happy with a coffee, then you can't be happy with a yacht, or you won't be happy with a yacht. So if I was to swap to another caffeinated beverage, I'm going to pick maybe a cold Monster Zero, or a cold Newtonic, or a cold My Protein Command. And I'm going to be in front of my laptop, whether that's getting ready for a big work block or a big calling session in my career, or whether that's me sipping on that before I go and train at the gym. I just really enjoy the buzz and the sort of ceremony of doing that. I'm pretty easily pleased in that regard. And I think a lot of people will take real value in thinking about those things in their life that don't cost an awful lot of money. They don't have a huge strain on you, but you feel pretty happy when you're doing them. And that is one of those moments for me. I mentioned getting ready to go and train. Training itself, I don't think it's super expensive, depending on your choice of gym membership. And you probably know by now, if you've been following for any time at all, I love lifting weights. I love getting stronger. I love feeling strong. I love getting the pump. I love feeling challenged by the training that I do. So I think that would be a low cost nice that I enjoy. Doing that socially is really fun as well. I like having a friend with me who's going to push me on sets, and I'm going to push them. And then during the rest periods between the sets, we're going to have a chat about all sorts of different things. And I really think that you break down a lot of barriers when you're a bit fried after or during a hard training session. You can just have really explorative conversations. So that's something that makes me happy. Other things that don't cost an awful lot: my morning walk. So when I'm walking in the morning, particularly during the summer. So for example, this morning, it was a really nice morning. I was in shorts and a t-shirt. I had a podcast on, and sometimes that'll be a podcast that I'm listening to just for my own self-development, or sometimes it'll be a podcast for my research for an upcoming guest on the show. I just feel my mind at that time in the day, when I'm out and about in nature, it's just stimulated by what I'm consuming, and the environment around me is feeding into that. So the estate that I go into is really scenic. You've got grass, you've got water, you've got open space, you've even got this old sandstone bridge that I walk across, and it's a really good place to spend time, and that makes me really happy. I think another thing that doesn't cost very much money is when I have friends at the house to watch football, or I go to my parents' house and watch the rugby with my dad. Of course, results will dictate quite how happy I am while doing that, and the scores for either Rangers or the Scotland rugby team, whoever I'm watching with dad. That's an activity I really value, and it's not something that costs an awful lot of money whatsoever. Question 4 is kind of the flip of that. What do you unashamedly spend a lot of money on? I think some people would consider an annual golf membership to be a lot of money, and if I look as a percentage of what I spend per year, around £1,000 for a golf membership is a decent chunk. And then, of course, you have to have your clubs, albeit they last you for a very long time. But I'm completely comfortable with the spend that I have on that, considering how much I use it and the enjoyment I get from it, and the access and the types of people that I can get to play my golf with as well. And of course, there's a lot of frustration that comes with that, but I certainly unashamedly commit my money towards golf every year. I mentioned training in the last answer. I suppose the gym membership that I've chosen in that field is larger the monthly expense at David Lloyd, because there's lots of more competitively priced gyms, but I really value the sauna access and the spa element of David Lloyd. So I would say that I'm unashamedly spending money on that option, because my health, my fitness, and my recovery and how I feel really matters. So I'm not ever going to cheap out on that. What else will I not feel shame about spending a decent proportion of money on? This might sound funny because of what I'm going to tell you further on the episode, but accommodation on holiday. I've made this mistake before, and I know it's often the case that when you're busy on holiday, you really are only sleeping in the room and then getting up and going about your day, and then you're out all night until you get back. But if you are somebody like me that is happy with where they live day to day in their apartment or their house or wherever they stay, I am more inclined now to make sure that I rent somewhere on holiday that I'm actually happy to spend maybe a slow morning, or if I'm having a quiet evening in. And this has been vital recently when I've gone to Dubai in March and May. The Airbnbs that I've chosen have been places where I've been really happy to sit and work in the morning before I've maybe gone and trained with a friend, or maybe I've had a night where I haven't gone out for dinner and I've just rested up and I've just sat in the apartment, and it's been really chill and really, really nice. Because I shouldn't leave my nice flat at home to feel uncomfortable or feel like I need to escape somewhere on holiday. I don't think that's right. And I guess the reason I laugh before even getting into this is that we've just booked to go to Ibiza at the end of July, and I wasn't involved in the booking of the hotel, so I'm not quite sure how nice it is. The images look okay from what I've seen online, but I don't think it's up to what I've been staying in recent times. And I guess the last area that I'll talk about, and link to what I've just said there, is that as a proportion of my income and what I had back in 2019, my flat and my mortgage that my brother and I got together was more of a stretch. And we unashamedly decided to spend money on that, because we were able to get a property in an area that we really wanted to. It was close to our parents. It was in a nice area. It was somewhere we could see ourselves staying for a long period of time. And that's been the case over 5 years now. And while that payment on the mortgage and the value of the property now is much more comfortable because we've increased our fiscal power and our earning power during that time, we've continued to invest in the property. There's been 2 new bathrooms. We've done some other features in the flat, like paneling and decoration. We're about to spend a pretty chunky sum on a new kitchen. So I would say we in general were very happy with the cost associated as a percentage with living somewhere that I really want to, and continuing to improve that as well. So that's probably the last thing that I would say unashamedly I spend a lot of money on. Question 5, nice hypothetical one. Would you rather your kid was being bullied or the bully? The answer to this for me is absolutely to be bullied, because I think those that are bullies have far more issues to resolve and to overcome than someone who is being bullied. On a personal level, I don't know how much I've talked about this before, but I experienced bullying towards the latter years at primary school and the early years at secondary school. And while it's awful and I wouldn't wish that on my child, I got through it. It taught me a lot of different things. And I think it says an awful lot more about the bully who chooses to bully someone, chooses to pick on someone, and tries to make them feel a victim than it does about the person that's being bullied. And it's not in my value set to bully or torment somebody. I'm sure there's people over the years that have maybe been made uncomfortable by me or been upset by me, but I haven't bullied them. It's been like a one-off instant where I've like challenged them and I've done it in a way that I've been comfortable with. Whereas I think bullying is like a targeted harassment and like picking on someone. Particularly bullying, I think in general, like is a repeated act, but it also is designed to try and make somebody feel weak and powerless and doing it repeatedly. And I certainly don't think that's something that I would ever want to do or ever want my offspring to do either. And I think that type of choice to do that is a real character flaw and it's a weak behavior in its own regard. And I certainly reflect on those that gave me a hard time at school when I was 11 or 12 years old. They were not doing it from a place that they were actually happy with or a position of strength. And controversially, I also think that the person who is being bullied should at some point escalate physically to draw a line and demonstrate that there's a particular point that we push to. And from that point onwards, the gloves are off. You've broken the social contract. I'm gonna inflict some violence on you in order to call an end to this. However, the school system at that point in time, and I probably think it's probably gotten worse now, I think it definitely discourages from that. But that's definitely my reflection on it. I don't think I would ever want my child to be a bully because I think it's something that's much harder to work through if somebody maybe relishes being a bully. I think that's a pretty negative character trait. Question number 6. What are your views on the state of immigration in the UK? Appreciate you might have different views, whether it's based on illegal or legal to discuss. I think it's vitally important that more people are starting to talk more freely about this. In recent years, the topic has been a total no-go, and you've had like the two extremes where you've had people who believe in no borders whatsoever, or you've had like genuine bigots and xenophobes who've been like, oh, I don't want anyone coming into the country ever. And as with all these things, there's nuance, but people who want to talk about that have been shouted down or characterized into these two camps and these two extremes. I think what I will say is the sad reality is that we've run into a situation in Britain where we haven't talked about it enough, and very few people now can look at what's happening in Britain and its relationship with immigration and the state of the country and where we're heading towards and the rate of that change and think that it's a positive. Because we have two problems, I would say. The problem for starters is that we've got too much illegal immigration, which is uncontrolled, no documentation, and therefore unsafe. And you can see the crime stats, particularly in the towns in England that have housed people that have come to the UK in small boats and have no documentation. That is a huge risk and a societal disruptor. And we also have seen a big increase post-Brexit of unskilled labour and people coming with unskilled labor and bringing their families as well and having a dependency on the state because they're not working in a role that's been able to provide for themselves, or they're not able to find work, which again is a bit of a misnomer. I looked at the stats, and last year there was just under 700k net migration. So that's 700k more people came to the UK than left. And interestingly, in the year 2024, 9,500 millionaires will leave the UK. So we are seeing 9,500 millionaires leaving the UK. So people who contribute as taxpayers, and the vast majority of migration that we're receiving in the way has been net negatives in terms of dependence on the state versus paying into the state. There will, of course, be outliers to that, and I want to get onto that because part of the benefits of immigration is that we do attract really highly skilled people, but we're not doing that correctly. But basically, 700k net migration is a completely unsustainable level for the UK to have. That's why the housing market's a bit fucked. It's why rental stock has gone up by 20% in terms of rentals, because people are scrambling for accommodation. And if you have what is basically 10% of the UK population growing every single year, we're not building houses at that rate. We're not building accommodation at that rate. We're definitely not staffing the NHS at that rate. So unfortunately, we're not set up for immigration in the way that a country like an Australia or a Dubai is, because the UK has become a bit of a soft touch for illegal immigration and mass immigration, and nobody can argue for illegal immigration being a positive. Yes, people are maybe fleeing from terrible circumstances and terrible situations, but many people who are illegal immigrants are also economic migrants and coming for an economic benefit, and the UK has made itself a real target for that. And by not being harsh on that and not being strong on that, you put yourself in a really difficult position. And what I will say is countries have borders for a reason. And those borders, within those, we have laws to be obeyed as part of that country, and they differ from country to country. And we also have an existing culture, which differs from country to country, which should be respected by anyone coming in. And I think there's been numerous events over the last 3 to 5 years that have indicated that in the UK, we don't have enough respect for British rule of law. We don't have enough respect for British culture. And if we continue to allow the immigration of people who are coming here who have no intent to contribute to the UK on a fiscal scale or integrate on a cultural level, then we're going to really skew the balance and we're going to continue to have some problems. I do not have an immediate clear answer to this. I'm not a politician, albeit we're going to get onto some political matters during this conversation because it affects society as a whole. But principally, having people come to the UK who have skills and abilities and qualifications that we actually have a lack of makes total sense. And that is how I would always expect things to be. So if I wanted to go to Australia, I would have to apply, I would have to demonstrate my value, and then I would be granted or I would not be granted. That makes total sense to me. And I don't understand why that is a taboo thing to say. And I know that the people that I grew up around that came from different cultures and different countries that came to the UK, their families had all come here to work or start businesses and contribute. And because they were economically contributing, they were incentivized to integrate culturally with the colleagues they worked with or with others in the community. And those people became UK citizens and people who were proud to be part of the UK and integrated. I don't think we're getting that at the moment, and I think that's being reflected in some of the disturbances that we're seeing in some of these towns, particularly down south. I think in Scotland we're quite unaffected at this moment in time, but it will get worse if we don't keep a handle on it. And I've always said this, and I think back to Brexit and people, and we don't need to get into Brexit as a whole because there were pros and cons to the whole argument. I understand that. But when we had, for example, a lot of Polish people come to the UK, and the reputation of Polish people was incredibly strong. They were hard workers, they were diligent, they were keen to be here and excited to be here. But now we're in a position where we're getting tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people coming, and we don't think that's the same thing. And if people are coming here and not contributing, we're actually growing the tax burden on those that do contribute. And I spoke about this with Andrew Craig in episode 200, and I've looked into the stats. But the public sector pension burden, so people that are paid pensions that used to work in the public sector, is now greater than the UK's GDP. So that is literally economic suicide. It's game over. And then we're going to layer on top of that more state burden via non-UK population coming. I think it's a frighteningly naive approach, and I'm glad that more people are being willing to speak about this. However, and I'll get onto the general election results shortly, I don't think that's due to change with any of the major political parties at this moment in time. So question number 7 is, how did you feel about the general election result? It's a really interesting time because that is the second general election in a row where there's been a landslide majority victory, but this time it was totally in reverse. So in 2019, Boris Johnson won a massive landslide against Corbyn and Labour, and this time around Starmer has won a massive landslide against the Conservatives. But it's also the 4th Prime Minister we've had in 2 years, so it's an incredibly volatile period driven by a number of things. And I think first and foremost is the self-destructive policies and behaviours of the Conservative Party. And second of those is that there's a little bit of a tiredness with the administration because I think they've been in government for 14 years. I know we're talking a lot about politics in this episode, so please do fast forward to question 8 if this isn't your bag. But I'm quite disconnected with politics day to day. But when I was at school and at university, I was a bit of a geek in that space. In fact, my master's degree is in politics. And my understanding that I came to learn was that historically, and I think this is the case again in this election, Labour only ever wins when the Conservatives basically collapse after a long period of government, or there's been a seismic geopolitical event. Both World War II and the C-19 period are probably indicators of both of those. But effectively, the middle voter base, the guys that could be swung to vote either way, have deserted the Conservatives because they felt betrayed by their handling of the economy, some of the scandals that unfolded, how they've handled immigration, how they handled lockdown in the C-19 period, albeit Labour wanted to go harder and stronger on that, which is bananas to me. A number of Conservative voters have also deserted the party and collapsed their vote because they completely lost control of core Conservative values on the family, gender ideology, British culture and history, immigration. We've got higher tax than ever before. All these topics and policies are things that the traditional Conservative voter would not be happy with. So inevitably, their vote started to fall away. And I think Reform have definitely gained from this because they've spoken up for some of those interests that people have got that they don't feel that they should be ashamed of. And to see them as one of the third or fourth largest parties in terms of the vote share, but not seat share, is really interesting. The Lib Dems have done amazing in that election in terms of their results. They actually won my constituency. And they've got a really good idea of how to target the electoral system, because with first past the post, it's more important where your votes are and how many you've got in a particular constituency rather than what you've got totally. And interestingly, stats-wise, Labour only gained a couple of percent of the vote, but our electoral system meant that they've got over 400 seats because their votes were in areas that were really important. So Corbyn versus Starmer, they probably got 2 or 3% more of the vote, but they got radically more of the seats because they were able to target constituencies accordingly, and that's a good way to do it. And I'll cards on the table, I am no fan of what the Labour Party stand for in terms of socialism. I don't think many people who want self-determination, who listen to a podcast like this one, who are in favour of the strong family unit and traditional values, will be inclined to go for some of the core Labour policies. And my concern is that things are going to get worse before they get better. I think in opposition, the Conservatives have to really have a look at themselves and actually try and be the party that they said they were going to be. That's why they won so convincingly in 2019. And they need to get some genuine right of centre traditional policies on tax, on immigration, on defence, on safety for people as well. And when you look at Europe making a move to the right with all the political parties they've been voting for, when people feel unsafe, when people feel unheard, when they're suffering from high cost of living, high energy costs, they're going to look to fiscally but also socially conservative policies for people to feel happier in their country again. And I think that's where we're heading towards in Britain, albeit at this moment in time, we're going to have a Labour government for 4 to 5 years. Okay, question number 8. What will it take to get your top 3 dream guests on the show? In short, it's going to take more growth, a bigger subscriber base, more reach, because for the very top guests, one of the primary filters they're going to use to make the decision whether they're going to come on the show or not is this a good use of my time? If I go on X show or Y show, they've got 10,000 subscribers, but this show's got 40,000 subscribers. The show with 40,000 subscribers is typically, and not always, a better use of their time. Now, there are outliers to that. I've just interviewed Connor Beaton of Man Talks. He's a huge guest who was really impressed by 2 things: the depth and the breadth of the episodes I published, but also my question style and the research that I do. And that obviously helps, and I need to keep doubling down on that. But sheer size does matter. So for guests like Jordan Peterson or James Clear or Ali Abdaal, those kind of guys I'm really aspiring to host at some point, they will absolutely review how big a show is before they do that. So I need to get to a particular point. The other factor that I think I will flag, and this is maybe why some shows have done better than others because of where they're based, is location. So if you're in the right place with the right setup and a nice studio, then if somebody's touring, then you can absolutely be a convenient booking for them so that they can do some more publicity while they're touring or what they're up to. So for me, for example, when I was in Dubai, Daniel Priestley came on the show in November, December last year. That worked amazingly well for both of us because Daniel got to book another good podcast. He did my show, he did Mike Thurston's show, and that worked out in terms of location. So when it comes to me getting the top 3 dream guests, I probably also need to be in the right location at the right time too. Number 9, at 259 episodes, what would you like to have achieved by episode 518? I think some of those dream guests that I've just named, Jordan Peterson, James Clear, Ali Abdaal, I think some of those are closer than others, but we will see. But I'm genuinely just excited to keep recording great conversations. I've mentioned I've just hosted Connor Beaton. If I reflect on episode 130, which is roughly half of where I am just now, I was nowhere near getting somebody like Connor Beaton. That was not on the cards. So it is a really mad game how quickly things move. And while I'm in no rush to wish the time away to get to episode 518, I'd love the show to have a bigger and a wider reach and a more positive impact on the people that it reaches. I'd probably quite like to have a studio location that becomes like more of a base for me that I have more episodes for. So maybe even guests would drop in there because they want to come and be interviewed. I mean, I've had a few guests come up from England to the studio in Glasgow, but it's not a regular thing. More tangibly, I absolutely think I'll have done more tours to different cities and countries to record in person. So whether that's more time in London, more time in Marbella, more time in Dubai, more time in wherever that is. Maybe I go to the States at some point. I think that would be a really cool development by the time we're in episode 518. And I know you maybe want me to answer this with a set number of subscribers. So I want this number of subscribers by episode 518. I haven't really got that in my head. I think, and I toy with this idea sometimes, it might really benefit me to have aggressive metrics. And if I was to set those, then I probably would need to seek some sort of advice from somebody on how to set that goal. But I really, really, truly do not want to become a slave to a numeric goal. And I really don't want to define the podcast purely by one number. And I don't want to be refreshing the screen to see if I've hit that number after a particular episode. I'd much rather just keep producing, keep enjoying the process, and just keep trying to achieve what is possible for me. Question number 10. Have you explored any therapy or coaching, or have you thought about it? Nothing official. I think when I started journaling in 2020, I was looking for a level of self-exploration and checking in with myself that maybe could have been granted to me via therapy. And I found the process of gratitude journaling pretty therapeutic. I haven't actually been drawn to talking therapy before, and there's no doubt there's benefits. Many guests have spoken about that, and many of my close friends have spent time with a therapist and have spoken really highly of how that's shaped up for them. Coaching wise, I have had mentors officially across many different capacities and different areas of my life, and I will continue to do so. And I've got lots of unofficial mentors as well that I really go to for advice. I think in terms of coaching that I'm looking for at this moment in time, and I think what will come soon, is I'll probably have somebody support me with scaling a business of my own. So in sharp contrast to how I feel about some other areas of my life, I think I've actually held back at times from launching more products and more services. And there's probably numerous reasons for that I need to explore, but largely it probably comes from a place of doubt or some sort of limiting belief. And often it's a lack of clarity for what exactly needs to be done in terms of like step by step, process by process. And you'll have heard some people say, and you'll have heard me say before, that many people procrastinate or don't take action or the next step due to discomfort. And discomfort for most people when it comes to business and what I see and what I see in myself is normally in relation to being uncertain about what exactly needs to be done. So having complete clarity on what needs to be done would probably be provided by a coach at some point. I would say, thankfully, I've started to generate some momentum, particularly with the sales consultancy and the coaching stuff now. I've been gaining more one-to-one clients for initial calls and going through things and doing some support for them, which is actually helping me build out the video course, which is coming. And action has really trumped anxiety and everything around that, because I absolutely think once I have more of that momentum in that business and I've started to understand what on earth it might actually look like, the best way for me to scale and to sharpen would be with a quality business coach who can really help me shortcut some of those things. But you need to have some momentum to start with. In contrast, I think somebody will be like, oh, I probably need to start the gym before I get a coach in the gym. I do think with business, you need to have something for them to shape with before you start. Otherwise, it seems far too hypothetical. So I think I would probably look for some coaching in that space, and I think that would help me shortcut and avoid a lot of obstacles. Question 11, who has had the most profound impact in your life, and who do you look up to? I think in terms of impact, it's got to be my parents. I mentioned they would be on the board of directors, and Dad has been a real role model for me by how he's led the family, how he's provided for the family, how he's run his own business. He's in his 70s and he's still working and he loves it, and it keeps him sharp, it keeps him happy, and it keeps him stimulated. How Mum and Dad raised my brother and I is so important. Mum has complete unconditional love, relentless support, so kind in terms of putting us in the best possible position, but is also demanding of the standards that we hold ourselves to. And I certainly look up to how they brought up my brother and I. I think that's had a profound impact on my worldview and how I see things. Try and give a bit of a more broader one here. So like other people I look up to or people that have had an impact on me, I really believe that what we consume in our eyes and our ears is very important. And what was quite formative for me at probably 2021, when I was towards the end of university, I was consuming a lot of online fitness content and also aspirational content that made me want to work in sales and want to push my brain and my body and my mindset and to make money and progress. And I don't watch a lot of their content now, but I really liked at the time Christian Guzman. I really liked Chris Jones. These were two guys that were in incredible shape. They were working hard. They were building their dream business and they were really hustling. And that was inspiring because I'd never seen anything like that before. And that was what, 2012, 2013, 2014. Both of those guys were American, so I definitely found people closer to home as well. And I consumed lots of a guy called Jamie Alderton's content. Back then, he was known as Grenade J. And of all places, I actually used to watch him on Snapchat back in 2014, 2015. And then when his first book came out, so it was called Mindset with Muscle, I really loved that book, and it really opened up my mind to what I could do if I could master my body and master my mind and try and control how I felt about things. He also led me to discover Dan Meredith and his book, How to Be Fucking Awesome. And I actually got to interview Dan about that book back in 2021. And I would say I definitely looked up to those individuals and the people that I consumed content from. And they definitely helped me to accept and move into a period of life where I accepted I wasn't going to live a really average, normal, unhappy existence. And whether that's the most profound impact on my life, I don't know. It certainly doesn't compare to the values that my parents instilled in me, but it definitely made me go down a path which is not completely normal and completely average, much like the people listening to this. And you guys, you've decided you're not going to be sad and unhappy and overweight and depressed and working in a job you hate. You've decided to do something you really care about, and there'll be different stages and different things you're working on, but you're not going to accept what the average person in the UK or the US or wherever you listen to this lives like. Question 12, ever recorded an episode and not published it? Yeah, a couple of times. There's a couple that were recorded that never went out, and there's actually been a couple of re-records at the request of guests as well. I always want to release something that the guest is most happy with and pleased with how they came across, and it serves a big proportion of my audience. Not every episode will serve every member of my audience. That's not how it works. But when an episode goes out, it should, in general, serve a chunk of my audience and they should get something from it. So if a guest feels they didn't come across their best, then I'm typically happy to re-record again. And then if I felt the episode didn't go well at all and the guest doesn't want to re-record, then it won't go out. But that's only happened maybe, I would say, twice. Number 13, what are the low-cost, no-cost improvements most young men should focus on? You've got to master the body, and you will gain greater control over your mind with that. Because one of the single biggest ways that you can prove to yourself and improve your value across society is show that you have agency and control of your life and the direction it's going. And there's no better way to do that than to shape your body. So dedicate some time to training, pushing yourself in that environment, managing what you eat, managing what you drink, and also how you spend your time as well. I think if you're someone that's feeling a bit undervalued in society, who's feeling a bit unsure as a young man, you're going to gain so much by instilling some of your confidence in yourself, by your ability to build a body that you've worked hard for, that you're pleased with, and has been done through two things that are really valuable: effort and discipline. This is really low cost in the grand scheme of things. You join a gym, you buy your own food, you prep your own food, you sleep a little bit more, you do more walking or running than just sitting on the couch, and you're going to end up in a good position. And you really have invested time and energy rather than money, and the tangible results from it as a young man, you're going to feel the benefits. Other low cost things that stand out is channeling where your attention goes. Now, attention, if we think of it as a commodity or a currency, is one of the most valuable things that we have. But if I answer this question as low fiscal cost rather than low cost in a hypothetical term or a higher level, if you direct your attention towards a couple hours a day scrolling TikTok, or making plans for the next night out of the weekend, or on the latest drama with your friend group, or with the girl that you've been talking to or texting, or the latest addictive Netflix series that everyone's binge watching, you're going to reap the same results as people who get stuck in those habits and who get stuck invested in those particular areas. None of those things that I've named in their own right by themselves are inherently destructive. And many successful men and many people that listen to this show that are doing fantastically well will dabble in one or two of those things. But nowadays, it's so easy to be involved in so many low agency activities, to assign the majority of your attention towards what I would call degenerative or reductive habits and behaviors. That is a trap. So instead, you should invest your attention in things that really matter. Building a skill set that you can use, improving in your area of employment or in your business, having genuine connection and genuine friendships, having a clear training and nutrition plan that you can stick to, having a deeper relationship and support with and for your family, listening to content that serves you and doesn't just excite you or turn your attention for a moment or two, but gives you long-term value. Where your attention goes is a low-cost change in your life that you can make that will set you apart from the people who do get sucked into the latest things or the latest distractions. Question number 14, is there any particular handbrake within your life that's stopping you from leveling up? I really like this imagery as well, actually. So I mentioned that not pushing my sales consultancy business more than I have already and doing it before now is definitely a regret. And I think that's because I've had the handbrake on in some sense, because handbrakes can't, how will I explain this? Handbrakes can't sit on if we want to make forward progress. If it's on, we're not going to go forward. But when we take the handbrake off, there's also the risk that we roll backwards. So it's not just about being comfortable with, oh, I'm going to go forwards now. It's also accepting the fact that if you take the handbrake off, there might be periods where you go backwards, and knowing that you'll need to try and take some sort of action to reverse that trend. And I actually had a call last Wednesday with one of the guys that I've given sales coaching to. And for him, if we were to use this analogy, the handbrake was that his cold outreach on LinkedIn would maybe come across as too salesy. So his messages to people over DM. So by him taking the handbrake off, he embraced the fact that some people, if you roll backwards, might consider him too salesy. And that's absolutely an understandable barrier to have, because you don't want to be seen as that, particularly if you've never done it before. But we gave him the confidence in his approach. I gave him some templates he can use and little amends he can make to make them more personal. And already that handbrake's now off, because while he's aware that in order to grow the business, he must make sales and he must contact people, the handbrake must come off. He's also completely now fine with the fact that the handbrake's off. So he actually might encounter some people who do think he's too salesy and don't enjoy it. So that's the nature of anything. When the handbrake comes off, there's obviously the opportunity to go forward, and we must try and do that. But we also have to accept the risk and the downside that when the handbrake comes off, there's going to be times where we go backwards and it's a little bit frightening. So there's always risk with your decision. But you must remember, and I must remember myself, and this is a reminder to me, inaction or not taking a decision or staying where you are is also a type of decision, and is also something you have to be comfortable that you have decided to do. Okay, number 15, what's your thoughts on hybrid fitness lifestyle? Hybrid fitness has grown massively in popularity for good reason. And I think it's certainly a good way to be far more active and probably healthier in a number of metrics than the average guy that's going to the gym and doing a bodybuilding split that they maybe have fallen out of love with, or they aren't really putting the intensity they want to into. I think the calorie expenditure and the health benefits of that is pretty hefty, because people are also giving themselves more leeway just by being more active in terms of how much food they can probably eat to fuel themselves. I think the one area that I always flag that I think people should be cautionary about is many of the best physiques that you see doing hybrid fitness now, and the ones that you maybe look up to, they didn't build their physique doing what they're doing now. The shape and the muscle that you see them have probably came from years of hypertrophy training as the main goal and the main focus, or they're one of these genetic outliers, or, as is the case with many of the people at the top of any industry, they use some form of PED or steroid. So if people are being too general in their training and they're going down the hybrid route and they're maybe got aspirations of building like rippling thick muscle, you should probably consider whether that approach is right to achieve that goal. But what I like about the hybrid space is that if you are just focused on being a little bit healthier, maybe being a little bit leaner, maybe using your time really efficiently in the gym or when you're training, then it's a really, really good option from that perspective. I also think that it is going to continue to grow for the next little while. I think High Rocks is still going to continue to ride the wave unless it falls off. I'd be very surprised. I just think that people need to be conscious of how they program in that space. And I've had Fergus Crawley in the podcast twice, and his business partner at Omnia, Johnny Payne's been on the show as well. These are guys that were in the hybrid space before it became quite as popular or as fashionable as it is now. And I look to them for people that are looking for programming in that space. They really know what they're doing. Whereas I think people who've maybe pivoted from a bodybuilding style, coaching style to suddenly being a hybrid expert, I'm always reticent of thinking that they are absolutely the masters of what they're doing in that space. So I do think that the hybrid fitness lifestyle seems to be a really positive move for people to be really healthy. I think a lot of people moving across to it are reaping the rewards of the excitement and the novelty of it, which is fantastic. But I also think people should be cautionary that they're not necessarily going to see the same results as the outliers in that field. In the same way, the vast majority of people that start a bodybuilding split don't end up looking like C-Bomb or looking like Jay Cutler or looking like Ronnie Coleman. You need to remember that you're going to go over there and you need to try and just be the best version of you in that space rather than the Aldo or the B-Tech version of somebody else. Question 16. How important has it been having other friends who do social content or who podcast? I think it's very helpful having people who can relate identically to your struggle or your success is really, really cool. And being able to share ideas with them about that as well. I've mentioned many times before, I've shared lots of guests back and forth. David McIntosh hosts the Development with David podcast. We're both young Scottish podcasters, and well, young in terms of, well, I'm all older than David, but young in terms of in the space. We share guests. We have like abundant mindsets towards that. I really think that that's a great thing to have, and to be able to maybe ask quick questions of each other about particular setups that we're working on, whether it's like the video or the audio, or whether it's the studios, or whether it's our templates that we're sending to guests to try and invite them onto the show. That's really, really cool as well. So I think that's been important, and it's nice to have people that understand what you're going through to a larger extent. Question 17, what gets you excited for the rest of the year? Well, we've got 6 months to go. What else am I excited for? I mentioned I've got a holiday coming up. So at the end of July, I'm going to Ibiza. So for starters, that'll be really fun. It's 3 days, so it's going to be full on. I'm just going to completely take the time away from work and everything else. It's going to be much less like the holidays that I've done to Dubai recently. It's going to be much more of a party holiday, which would be cool. I've got some really stretching targets from a sales perspective in work, and I've got some really big deals that I'm right on the cusp of, and I've got a couple that have landed that haven't completed yet. So that's going to feel really good, and that's going to stretch me. I'm doing more of the sales coaching stuff, which I think is going to be extremely exciting for me to try and distill down my wisdom and pass it on to people and see the positive ripple effect of that. Because I think it's one of my favorite things to do is when you explain a concept to somebody, you maybe understand how it directly applies to their life, and then you try and distill it down and see if they can action it in a way that makes it their version of it. And then you find out the result from it and it's gone well, and you're like, oh wow, we did that together and I helped you move to that. That's really, really cool. Podcast wise, I've got some great guest bookings coming up, and there's lots of opportunities that I don't even know about yet that I'll be recording with in October, November, December, and that's still to come, and that definitely has me excited. I will definitely look forward to going back to Dubai, probably November time. So that's something I'm looking forward to. It's definitely one of my favorite places to spend time. I probably, when asked this question, I probably need to book more fun focused activities, like leisure wise, that I can look forward to. Because when they're in the diary, there's also the enjoyment of the anticipation. And that's something I need to consider. So I need to consider what that might look like. Don't know whether that's a festival or a sports event or something like that. Let's wait and see, but that's kind of prompted that in my head. Number 18, what are some truly happy memories that you're reminded of when asked this particular question? Great question. I've just been talking about holidays, haven't I? So if I talk about some of my favorite holidays over the years and something that always springs to mind, I guess I've been talking quite a lot about family in this podcast. Definitely my family holidays to the Isle of Arran when we were kids. We went there for about 10 years, the first fortnight of July, from the age of like 9 until I was 17. And I absolutely loved that. That was amazing. That's some of my most happy memories. It's when I started playing golf. It was when I played a lot of tennis. We used to play rugby and football with the other kids that were my age. And some of my happiest memories are doing that, certainly. It was the first time that we played drinking games as well. We used to play a tennis game called Bluff, and we would do it as a drinking game. So that was fun to like do that in what was quite a safe environment to learn what your limits might be or what your limits might not be, and to do that. Those are definitely really happy memories as well, because you had relative autonomy as a kid doing what you want to do with book your own tea time for the golf, book your time on the tennis court, meet up with your friends at night, have a few beers, have a few ciders, or whatever it was back then. And I think that was a really, really fun, happy period as well. So that's a truly happy memory when you're very carefree at that age as well. Number 19, as your curiosity and your interests develop, do you find it harder to relate to others or to be relatable? Hmm. I don't. I don't think so. I think my interests have developed, and they're always changing, and that will always shape as those change who you spend your time with and what you spend your time on. But I would say I'm not radically different in terms of how I spend my time from the last few years. April 2020, start of the lockdown, start of the podcast. I definitely think that was a change point for how I spent my time. So there's probably been some change from that perspective. The biggest probably change before that is when you leave education. So 2014, graduated from university. I definitely think I was a bit of a different character during that time. So I probably relate to people differently during those periods. But I think just because of the nature of being an open minded and having so many different connections and types of people within my network, I think there's always different points of people's journey that I can relate to. And we'll always share, and as humans, I think we share a lot of different experiences, interests, and emotions that are all relative. So maybe somebody that's selling their business for £10 million can probably relate to the guy that's just quit their full time job to go all in on previously what was a side hustle because he remembers what that was like. So I guess the further, hmm, yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think when I can't relate to somebody. So it because I've been training for such a long time, that very fresh feeling of when I first started lifting and training does seem quite distant. But at that same point, I feel like I'm quite an actualized person. And I've got some really ingrained memories of what the environment was like when I started training. What was the atmosphere like? What were some of those early sessions like? How hard were they? Like how enjoyable were they? Did I actually even want to stick it? Or like when was the first time I maybe noticed progress? Or when did I feel that pump in my bicep for the first time? So I guess it's harder to relate to somebody who is at a part of your journey that's a long time ago that you experienced and it's very distant. But at the same time, I feel like I've got a really good memory and I can evoke quite a lot of these thoughts and feelings as well. Right, question 20. And this is, again, it feels like it's one of those ones where we're getting quite political. But is society completely finished? I really, really hope not. But we have become debased and a term that Zuby used on the podcast, unmoored from traditional values. And many of these traditional values have kept humanity alive and progressing for such a long time now. And you cannot, as a society, fly in the face of reason. You cannot fly in the face of biological fact. You can't reject common sense and expect anything other than impending disaster. And I think that's what we're seeing in many regards. However, I think enough people are now getting agitated and pushing back and disagreeing. But unfortunately, we've actually gone pretty far away from where we should have gone, and the toxic, woke, debased agenda is quite well embedded in many, many places. I spoke about earlier, a lot of the main political parties are all on board with a number of different parts of an agenda that most of the general population are pretty uncomfortable with when it comes to tax, when it comes to gender, when it comes to tradition, when it comes to defense, when it comes to rule of law and how we conduct ourselves legally. A lot of people in society disagree with how we're actually moving, and I do think society has become debased. I do think society is a worse place to be than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. However, I also think that some of the first steps that we need to take back are to push back. And one of the biggest steps we need to do is that in the West, in particular, in the UK, we need to stop with self hating and stop shaming British culture and our history, because the worst impact on our society that I think we've had in the last few years is my generation and the younger generations have been taught through the education system almost to feel ashamed and guilty of being British. And our media have kind of openly pushed this narrative that our history as Britain is wicked and evil, when in fact, everything should be viewed through the lens of its time. And Britain was and can be great again. And ultimately, Britain civilized the entire world, no matter what people want to say about it and the methods that were incurred during that period. And there's a powerful quote that I read from Konstantin Kisin, who hosts the Trigonometry podcast. Ideologies that teach us to be ashamed of our past have created a generation who are simultaneously unaware of the values that built the society in which they live and desensitized to the daily benefits they experience from the outworking of those values. if you look at what the UK has built and what it benefits from, the level of freedom we have, the level of support we have, the level of ability to express ourselves, we are incredibly fortunate. We are a liberal democracy. Now, I don't use liberal in the sense of being super liberal and free and loose, but we are liberal in the sense of we have a lot of autonomy over how we do things ourselves, and that is really positive. And I discussed this with Zubi, but I think moving forward, for starters, let's stop self-hating. Let's have a bit more pride in our national identity from a positive perspective and have some positive view of our traditional values that we have. But on an individual level and an individual basis, the type of people that listen to this, you've got good values, you've got agency, and you control what we can. I don't think you need to engage politically on a day-to-day, a week-to-week basis. But when you get the chance, of course, vote. But really, I think you as an individual need to lead yourself, lead your family, lead your community with the best intentions. Also be willing to publicly disagree when you see the traveling direction that society's going in and you're not being happy with it. I think you should disagree and not let somebody try and shout you down or shame you by some of the kind of easily thrown around toxic labels that come up as well. Because some of the labels, I mentioned the immigration discussion earlier, people were just shouting racist or shouting bigot earlier, like to shut down that level of debate when people were talking about these things. That's led us to a terrible situation. So in order for society to not progress towards this global mess that we're inheriting, let's disagree, let's push back, let's be sensible about it, be willing for some woke idiot to shout at you and be upset about it. That's absolutely fine. Question 21, and this is the kind of conspiratorial side, isn't it? How compromised do you think our politicians are these days? I do think many politicians are aligned with large institutions, large organizations, large funders that have vested interests for what the policies should be in different houses of parliament or different governments across the world. The system in the US actually uses the term lobbyists, and that is all related to like what finances are invested from which lobbyists and on which issues. So it's quite hard to see how politicians couldn't be compromised from that perspective in terms of how hard they might work on a particular bill or on a particular law or in a particular area of reform. Equally, you may have people say like, oh, politicians are compromised because those in higher levels of power that are in the background have evidence of them doing wrongdoing or some sort of crime that they want to cover up and don't want to be exposed. But whether a politician is being compromised or dictated to because they're like somebody's got information about them or somebody's paying them or putting money into a particular fund to drive them in a particular agenda, I think many politicians are really just happy to be in a powerful position and they see themselves as statusful and somebody that can have some sort of impact, and they don't really care what the decisions they're making are and what they result in. They care more about the fact that they're getting to make the decision, and I think that's part of the problem with politics. We don't have an awful lot of people with real vision and real views. We have too many people that all just agree on, oh, it's great to be here and I'm great to be somebody that's in charge. Question 22, what's the potential of the Scottish podcasting market? I think it's really high. I think seeing people creating wholesome, good content is fantastic. I think Scotland has lots of introspective, interesting, funny storytellers and people that have energy and excitement. I think some people pigeonhole themselves into just being a very Scottish centric podcast, and that's absolutely fine. But I think that will definitely limit the potential of the Scottish podcasting market because many people listening to this will be based all over the world, because I try to have conversations that are relevant to people all over the world. And I don't just talk from within the Glasgow bubble, or I don't just talk with a super regional accent. But I think the overall potential of the market is huge. It's been great to see more studios opening up and more studios improving the quality of the audio and the video that can go out from them. And I think that can only encourage people to create as well. A couple of the students that have done my podcast masterclass, the video course on how to start, sustain, and scale your own podcast, they've been Scottish and they've started their shows and they're between 10 and 15 episodes in, which has been amazing to see. So I think the potential of the market is fantastic, and I think Scottish people can really contribute to the podcasting game, whether that's on a really regional focused level or whether that's on a global level like I'm trying to do with the show. Then I think that's definitely there. Okay, last couple. Question 23. With the sales success you've had, what's been a deal that you reflect on that you didn't win and you still think about it? Oh, so many. There's one that was on the cards for this year. It was a really large deal, probably worth between 1.3 and 1.7 million, depending which options the client took within the package that we put forward. And we finished in the top three in the first round. I think there was 10 people tendered. We finished in the top three. And then when it got down to the final three, we went through sample reviews. We went through further questionnaires. We went through a couple of further meetings. And I felt really good about where we were. But ultimately, we were between 23 and 25% off on price compared to the person that won it. And that's 23 to 25% of the profit that we're looking to make from the deal. So it's very hard to find the fat to cut to do that, because you've got to make profit from a deal. You don't do a deal to just generate revenue. Like, revenue is all well and good, but profit is what pays the bills. And that would have been a really big deal, considering last year they had 1.1 million in sales total. I fully expect to do more than that this year, just with the other with recurring business and new business and some of the things I'm working on. But that would have just been 1.3 or even 1.7 million on top of that in one deal would have been spectacular. So I definitely think about that, because the size and the scale of doing one deal or one partnership to generate that would have been monumental. So I still think about that. I'm completely at peace with my approach to it and what I did and how I put things forward and how I positioned things and the relationship and the rapport that I built. But ultimately, you can only piss with the cock you've got. And if you can't make a deal happen at a level of profitability that you're happy with, you must be happy to lose it or walk away, because you shouldn't skin yourself to make a deal happen that didn't make you any money, because it would have taken a lot of operational resource to fulfill that contract. And it would have taken away my opportunities to do other things which are going to be more profitable. So yeah, I still think about that deal just because of the sheer size and scale of it. Question 24 and 25, a lot of overlap. I'll read you them both and I'll just answer them in one. You said that you hourly plan and time box. As such, do you struggle to live in the moment or be spontaneous? And then the question that links to it is, routine is great, but do you feel there's power in rocking the boat every now and then? I think with discipline comes freedom, and I hourly plan largely, but there's also spaces on the calendar for either things to run over or for things to come up and me to do things differently. I will also say the things that I put in the calendar and the things that I time box and plan for also include things I'm really excited about and I'm really keen to live in that moment. And by me being disciplined in other areas of my schedule, I can live in the moment when I'm doing things that are non-work related or non-revenue generating. So for example, this evening I'm going to watch the Euros quarterfinals, or at least one of the games anyway, and that's in the time, that's in my diary, that's planned, I know that's happening. And I'm going to be completely present because I've done my podcasting stuff. The episode's scheduled. The thumbnails are ready. It's all there. It's all done. I did my writing this morning for my sales masterclass that I'm working on, some of the scripts of the videos and some of the topics and modules. I was disciplined in that time. I also went to the golf simulator this morning and practiced and played Royal Troon on the simulator with my brother. Not very well, believe me. I was all over the place, and even though it's just a computer that you're playing, I was in the rough, having a terrible time. But I was completely present then because I knew that later in the day I had assigned time to enjoy myself. The spontaneous element and the rocking the boat element absolutely is more challenging with the approach that I've got. However, I also mentioned there's some blank gaps in the calendar that allow me to be spontaneous. If something comes up that serves my interest and excites me and makes me want to go and do it, then that's completely cool. And I've just got to go with that. And I think that's something that I'm completely comfortable with. I do think, however, that I spend time with people who are quite routined as well. But there are friends in my circle who are spontaneous, who will drop me a text and say, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? In fact, one of my friends invited me to a comedy show the other night. It was very last minute. I was genuinely at a dinner already, so I couldn't make it. But when things like that come up, I want to be able to say yes to them more often. So that's definitely something I'm working on. But I think we all have our crosses to bear, to use a religious term. We all have our traits that we have and things that allow us to perform at our best. And I know occasionally I can move the dial a little bit, rock the boat every now and then, as the phrase went, and be more spontaneous. But ultimately, I am somebody that likes to plan to a large extent. Okay, last two questions. 26. How do you deal with increased TikTok comment polarization? My goodness, it is a sewer on there, isn't it? Some of the clips that I've had in the comment sections have been absolutely bonkers. I don't even try wade into them 9 times out of 10. I just leave them to it. I think in general, that app is pretty low agency. I think there's been a lot of people that are probably watching this that maybe found me on TikTok, and that's really cool and really fantastic. But the overall people who publicly comment on the app are typically angry people who are triggered by your content. And I think that's a real shame, but that's just the nature of the game. And that's just unfortunately how it's going to be. And I can only empathize that somebody is feeling that upset and that angry with what I've shared and what I've posted that they would choose to lash out and be upset. That comes from a place that it's on their end, much like I spoke about when it came to bullying or being the bully or being bullied. A lot of the people that are lashing out, they're doing something from a place of upset and anger. They're not doing something from a place of happiness, and they're not doing so from a place of strength. And so for that reason, I feel sorry for a lot of the people that are getting mad on there. I do think it's a shame for my guests if my guests are getting absolute dog's abuse on there. But the vast majority of my guests that come on the show are pleased and happy to put themselves out there. And they understand the sincere praise that they get from people who listen to the full podcast, who DM them, who reach out, who maybe speak to them when they see them and say, oh, I heard you on Canberra Conversations. That is worth its weight in gold versus anonymous users or really sad, toxic people on TikTok saying rude things. Last question, and I'll answer this as seriously as I can. Do you think you'll place in the O Beach Classic this year? I used to always joke when I went to Ibiza. I went to Ibiza 2017 all the way through to 2019. Haven't been since. That at Ocean Beach, it's a little bit of a bodybuilding style competition where everyone's competing to be the most jacked, be the most lean, be most well presented. I have decided to do a little one to 2 kilo, maybe 2.5 kilos tops cut before I go. I go in 3 weeks' time, and I'm pretty much probably a kilo or two off where I would want to be, and I think I can do that. And I think I'll look hopefully jacked and tanned when I'm there. If I win the Ocean Beach Classic, that is yet to be decided, but I'm really looking forward to the holiday, and it is a very fun beach club to enjoy myself at. But that is a wrap for the questions for today. Thank you as always for tuning into these solo pods. They always do so well. I just released the top 10 most played episodes of the first 6 months of 2024, and episode 229 was in there. So if you really love your solo episodes, please go back and listen to lots more that end in a 9. There will be a solo Q&A, and I've probably answered a variation of a question that you may well have. And for next time, it'll be 269, and I look forward to your questions for then. Thank you for listening. I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.